whenever any issue is misrepresented for a long, long time, whenever you see people distorting facts, refusing to abide by facts, and not making any sense in their accusations, you may be sure that the reasons they state are not their true reasons and that there is something deeper behind it which they do not care to admit. This is particularly true in the case of capitalism. Capitalism has been misrepresented practically from its inception, both by its enemies and its alleged defenders. But the amount of distortion and misrepresentation which goes on today, even though evidence to the contrary is available and is accumulating year by year, is truly staggering. It is perhaps the single most misrepresented issue in cultural history. Therefore, it is important to ask ourselves, what are people's real reasons? When people are blind to the truth, obviously blind, when the issue is not merely an error of knowledge, it's not a matter of ignorance, but of psychological vested interests, we have to ask what are the vested interests behind people's attitude. And in the case of capitalism, the very obvious psychological root is man's fear of independence. Fear of independence, first of all, and consequently, fear of rationality. An anti-rational mentality is necessary to be anti-capitalist. And on a more formal level, these psychological evils unite in support of the morality of altruism. People are led to hate capitalism to the extent to which they subscribe to the altruist morality. In many cases, they would feel dimly, because they would be evading the issue and trying not to admit it, they would feel that there is a bad clash between the conventional morality which they have been taught to accept, which they're not independent nor brave enough to reject, and a clash between that and the nature of capitalism. In that sense, the nature of reality. They are caught between the fact of a false moral theory, which they dare not challenge, namely altruism, and the facts of reality which demonstrate over and over again that capitalism is the best, the most practical, and the most moral, in fact, the only moral system in human history. People dare not face that dichotomy because capitalism is incompatible with the morality of altruism. And those who have accepted that morality have such a psychological vested interest in it that they take their inner conflict out on capitalism. They make capitalism the whipping boy of their own inner contradictions. They know, in psychological sense, subconsciously, that they are wrong in regard to altruism, and they therefore acquire a vested interest to try to prove that capitalism is evil. If they can discredit capitalism, they can consider themselves free to pursue their own impractical, vicious morality. That is in terms of moral considerations. But deeper than that is, of course, the question what attracts them to the morality of altruism. Why has that morality been perpetuated for such a long time in spite of its obvious evils and blatant contradictions? And here we come to the issue I named first, that is people's fear of independence, fear of relying on their own judgment, on their own mind, and therefore feel fear of reason. It is their subconscious and sometimes conscious desire to permit a loophole to their irrationality. It is their reluctance to be at the mercy of an absolute reality. It is a desire to bypass reality in some way, to cut corners, to have an escape clause for their whims, their wishes, their fears, and the irrational element within them. What they fear when they fear capitalism is objectivity, rationality, and reality.
Ms. Rand, we're discussing the anti-capitalistic mentality, and we're doing that in the singular, although you've just pointed out that many of the causes are plural. Would you say that these plural causes do result in a singular anti-capitalistic mentality?
Well, not mentality in the sense of individual psychology. If you mean are all anti-capitalists in effect psychologically alike, I would say of course no. As in any evil, there are as many different psychological variants as there are people, but certain basic premises they would have in common. I would say the anti-capitalist mentality is the mentality which is afraid of independence, afraid of reason, afraid of reality. But that is in very broad fundamental terms. Within those broad abstractions, there are all kinds of variations and combination of elements which would operate in any given individual. So you may ascribe certain generalized principles to a type of mentality which would be opposed to capitalism, and these principles would operate in various degrees in every man who opposes capitalism, but that is not to say that everyone who opposes it is alike in all psychological essentials.
Mr. Hood.
Ms. Rand, would you elaborate the relationship between subjectivism, the view that reality is not perceived by consciousness but is created by consciousness, and the idea of statism, which seems to be in large degree based on the idea that if the government sets about to do something, that it can automatically achieve its ends irrespective of the facts of reality?
Well, you have really named the essence of the question here. Those who want to escape from reason and reality can do so only by means of hoping that their hopes, wishes, or fears can somehow triumph over reality, that one does not have to be bound by facts, that one's wishes can somehow succeed, regardless of whether they correspond to the facts of reality or contradict them. In such a case, the only excuse, not moral excuse, but psychological semblance of an excuse for such people is the fact that most of their desires and their irrationality takes place in the social context, and that if they wish something which is contrary to the facts, society, meaning other people, will somehow provide it. If they act irrationally, other people will save them from the consequences of their irrationality. If they demand the irrational or the unearned, other people will provide it. As Mr. Brandon said once, anyone who introduces as somehow into his idea of the means of achieving his ends always means somebody. And this is the clue to the statist psychology. They hope that by enslaving the producers of the goods in life, the economic producers, by creating an omnipotent state which will rule everybody's life, they, the irrationalists, will somehow ride on the shoulders of the rational members of society, the productive members, those able to deal with the facts of reality properly, not only in the issue of producing material goods, material wealth, but in all issues. If these providers are enslaved by the state, then their energy and their productiveness will permit the irrationalist to gain the unearned in matter, in the form of unearned wealth, and the unearned in spirit, in the form of unearned honors or government positions. The sole means to achieve the unearned not to achieve it because one can't, but to attempt to achieve it, is by means of physical force, which is why the enemies of capitalism are statists. There is no alternative to a free society except the establishment of a totalitarian state, which is the rule of men by force. When force is the standard of social relationships, then the irrational man may hope that somehow, by force, his masters will provide him with what he wants, will take care of him. He is willing to give total obedience to the state in exchange for the state saving him from the problem which he dreads most. That is the problem of facing life on his own, the problem of taking the responsibility for his own life, his own actions, and his own judgment. That is what he dreads, and his sole recourse, since there is in fact no escape from reality, is to hide behind those men whom he observes around him, who are able to deal with reality, who are not afraid to think, who act on their judgment and produce all values that men have ever achieved, intellectually or materially. It is these men that the irrationalist wants to enslave and force somehow to provide for him. This theme, of course, is clearly illustrated in Atlas Shrugged.